I was 32 when I took a solo trip through northern Arkansas in the fall of 2018. I had some vacation time saved up, and I needed to clear my head. I'd been working too much, stuck indoors, staring at computer screens under fluorescent lights for months. The Ozarks seemed like a good place to breathe again. I wasn't trying to find myself or anything like that. I just wanted quiet. No emails, no phones, just the sound of water, wind through trees, and maybe the crunch of leaves under my boots. I drove from Little Rock to a place near the Buffalo River, not too far from the town of Jasper. I'd found a small camping area online, but I didn't want the crowds or the people with loud music and plastic coolers. So instead of setting up at the usual sites, I hiked 2 hours down an old path that was barely a trail anymore. It ran along the river, twisting through woods that felt like they hadn't changed in 50 years. The spot I found wasn't marked, just a small flat area near the bank with a natural slope leading to the water. It was open enough for a tent, with trees behind me and the river about 30 feet in front. Across the river, a steep wooded hill rose up sharply. No trails over there, no signs of human life. I figured I had the whole area to myself. That first night was cold, but peaceful. I got a small fire going, cooked some canned chili, and listened to the river. No one else around, just darkness, wind in the trees, and the low, constant sound of moving water. I felt calm for the first time in months. I climbed into my tent, pulled the sleeping bag tight, and slept hard. The second day, I hiked a bit upriver, tried fishing even though I wasn't great at it, and just wandered around. By late afternoon, I came back to camp and settled in for another quiet evening. Same routine: fire, food, and staring into the dark woods. The only sound was a few birds and the river slapping against rocks. But sometime just after nightfall, I felt a shift. It wasn't anything I could explain at first. It was just a strange sense that I wasn't alone anymore. I was sitting by the fire, facing the water, when I got that feeling. I turned slowly and looked across the river. It was hard to see much in the dark, but the moon was bright enough that I could make out shapes. And there, on the other side of the river, halfway up the slope, I saw something. It looked like a man standing between two trees. He wasn't moving, just standing still. No flashlight, no gear, no fire. Just a figure, barely lit by the moonlight filtering through the branches. I stared for maybe 20 seconds, trying to convince myself I wasn't seeing what I thought I was. Could have been a tree, a weird shadow, something simple. But then he shifted his weight. Just a small movement, but enough to tell me it wasn't a tree. I didn't move. I just sat there, feeling like my body had gone heavy. My heart started to beat harder, but I told myself it was fine. Maybe it was just another camper. Maybe he got turned around or wanted to cross over in the morning. Maybe he hadn't even seen me, but that didn't explain why he didn't have a flashlight, or why he didn't make a sound, or why he just stood there watching. I sat still for a long time. Eventually, I leaned forward and added more wood to the fire, trying not to look obvious about it. When I glanced back across the river, the man was gone. The next hour was a blur of me sitting with my back against a tree, my head on a swivel. Nothing happened. I didn't see him again. I didn't hear any movement. I convinced myself I had imagined it or misread a shadow. Eventually, I forced myself to go to bed, keeping my knife inside the sleeping bag. The next morning, I felt stupid. I figured I'd let the darkness and the isolation mess with my head. I had a quick breakfast and went for a long hike, trying to shake the tension out of my shoulders. It worked, kind of. I spent the day moving, sweating, burning energy. But part of me was still on edge. When I got back that evening, nothing looked touched. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing out of place. I felt better. I made a bigger fire that night, kept it going longer, and stared across the river now and then. No one showed up. I finally crawled into the tent close to midnight. I woke up around 3:30 a.m. because I had to pee. The air was cold, and the inside of the tent was damp from my breath. I pulled on a jacket and unzipped the flap. I stepped out, walked about 10 feet toward the woods behind my tent, and took care of it. When I turned back toward the tent, something made me stop. There was a small pile of rocks stacked neatly by the fire pit. I hadn't done that. I hadn't touched any rocks since I set up the site. The pile was maybe 5 inches high, 5 stones balanced in a little tower. It was too precise to be random. I looked around quickly. I couldn't see anyone. The fire had long gone out, and the moon was behind clouds. The woods behind me were dead silent. My tent was 10 feet away. The river was a whisper in the distance. I didn't go back to sleep after that. I sat in the tent with the knife in my lap until the sky started to brighten. The next day, I didn't hike. I stayed at the site and looked for signs, footprints, broken branches, anything. But the leaves covered everything. If someone had come through, they didn't leave much of a trail. That night, I didn't light a fire. I thought if someone was watching, it was better not to give them something to look at. I sat in the dark for a while, then went into the tent early and didn't come back out. I barely slept. I kept thinking I heard things. Twigs snapping, leaves crunching, but never close. Just far enough that I couldn't be sure. Around 2 a.m., I heard something that made my skin crawl. The sound of something hitting the water. It wasn't loud, but it was steady, like someone slowly wading in. I sat up in the tent, heart racing. I didn't unzip it. I just sat there and listened. The water sound stopped after about 30 seconds. I didn't hear anything else. At dawn, I came out slowly. Nothing seemed different, but when I walked to the edge of the river, I saw boot prints in the mud. One set. They came out of the water and stopped just short of the dry ground, then turned back toward the river. I packed my stuff in under 10 minutes. I didn't eat. I didn't take pictures. I just got everything into my pack, threw on my jacket, and started walking. The hike back felt 3 times longer. Every sound felt wrong. I didn't stop to rest. I didn't look behind me. When I finally saw the edge of the trailhead and my car, I felt this weird mix of relief and exhaustion hit me all at once. I got in and drove without thinking. I didn't stop until I was back in a gas station near the highway. It's been years now, but I still think about that trip more than I should. I don't tell a lot of people about it. Most of them would just shrug it off and say it was nothing. But I know what I saw. I know someone was across that river watching me. I know someone came to my campsite when I was sleeping. I still don't know why they didn't do anything. Maybe they just wanted to scare me. Maybe they were waiting for something. I haven't been camping since. I still go hiking sometimes, but only for the day, and always on marked trails with people around. Because once you've felt that kind of silence, the kind where you know someone's watching, you don't forget it. You don't ever really feel alone again. I went hunting in northern Michigan back in October 2017. It wasn't my first solo trip, but it was the longest I'd planned. 5 full days out in the woods. No phone signal, no company, no distractions. Just me, my gear, and the forest. I was 34 then, recently out of a long-term relationship, working from home doing freelance CAD work, and badly needing a break from screens and voices. I picked a dense stretch of forest near the Upper Peninsula, miles away from the nearest highway. There was an old logging trail that led to a clearing I'd used before, not too far from a river and far enough from any town to avoid hearing cars or seeing people. I brought my .308 rifle, my compound bow, a trail cam, my tent, enough food for a week, and a small solar panel to keep my GPS and flashlight going. The first 2 days were normal. Cold mornings, quiet afternoons, long evenings by the fire. I didn't see much, just a few does and a small buck I let pass. It was more about the peace than anything else. Waking up to fog hanging over the trees, hearing nothing but squirrels and crows, feeling the cold air in my lungs. It cleared my head. But that changed on the third night. It was around 1 a.m. when I woke up. I couldn't tell why at first. There wasn't a noise or anything obvious, but I felt off. I lay there listening. The forest is always making some noise, but that night it felt too still. No wind.
No crickets. No owls.
Just this dry, cold silence. I got out of my sleeping bag slowly and unzipped the tent halfway, scanning the tree line with my flashlight. The light caught the tops of the trees and glinted off the dew, but there was nothing else. I figured maybe I was just spooked from a weird dream. I sat up for a bit by the fire pit, which had long gone cold, just watching the dark. Then, while I was sitting there, I heard it. Something crunching leaves far off, but steady. Not a deer, not a raccoon. It was too heavy, too slow, like a person walking without trying to be quiet. It stopped after a few seconds, and I strained to hear more, but it was back to dead silence. I waited maybe 15 minutes. Nothing. Then I went back into my tent and zipped it up tight, laying on my back with the rifle beside me. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, I checked the trail cam. I had it strapped to a pine tree facing a spot where I'd seen tracks the day before. It had snapped a couple of pictures the night before around 1:10 a.m., right when I'd heard those steps. The first few were of deer, but the last one was different. It wasn't clear, but you could make out a person. Not a hunter. No orange, no gear. Just someone standing half behind a tree, turned slightly toward the camera. Looked like a man, thin, wearing a jacket or something dark. I stared at it for a long time. That area was deep woods, not near any trailhead or road. No one should have been there. I hadn't seen another soul since I parked my truck. I told myself maybe it was a hiker who got turned around. Maybe he saw my camp and thought to check it out. Still, I couldn't shake the image. He wasn't walking. He was just standing. The way his body was turned, like he was half hiding, gave me a cold feeling deep in my stomach. I hiked out about half a mile that afternoon, thinking I'd find some kind of clue, footprints, trash, anything. But there was nothing. No snapped branches, no prints, no sound. When I came back, I moved my camp, just a few hundred yards uphill, closer to some thick underbrush and away from the river. I didn't want to be where he might have seen me. The fourth night was worse. I didn't light a fire. I cooked early, cleaned up everything, and stayed in the tent. I left the trail cam in its new spot and kept the rifle beside me again. I didn't sleep much. Around 3 a.m., I started hearing snapping sticks again. Same slow, heavy pace. Not fast, not panicked. Just footsteps. They came from the same direction the figure in the photo had been standing. This time they came closer, maybe 50 yards out. Still too far to see anything in the dark, but close enough that I could tell it wasn't an animal. It circled the camp. I swear it walked almost all the way around my tent. I held my breath the whole time. I had one hand on the rifle and one on my flashlight, waiting to hear a zipper or a rustle. Nothing came. The sound moved off after a while, heading back down the hill. When it got light, I stepped outside with the rifle shouldered. There were footprints, not boot prints, bare feet, long, wide ones, adult-sized. I followed them just a few feet before they disappeared into pine needles. Whoever it was had walked barefoot through freezing woods in the middle of October. That was the moment I decided I was done. I packed everything fast, skipping breakfast and breaking down the tent with shaking hands. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing in the trees. No one was there, but the feeling stuck with me the whole way back to the truck. The worst part came when I pulled the trail cam down. It had 3 new photos. The first was just darkness, maybe trees. The second had a shape close to the lens, just a blur like someone passed directly in front of it. The third was the clearest. It was a face. Not right up on the camera, but maybe 10 feet back, looking straight at it. Pale, dirty, with deep shadows under the eyes and matted hair. The mouth was slightly open like he was breathing through it. No expression, no reaction. Just staring dead at the camera in the middle of the night. He had no shirt on, just pants.
Nos shoes.
I didn't stop to look at it again. I shoved the memory card in my pack and left fast. The hike back to the truck felt twice as long. I kept hearing little noises, sticks cracking, wind moving through branches, but I didn't turn around. I didn't stop. I drove out of there in silence. Didn't stop until I hit a gas station an hour south. I used their Wi-Fi to upload the trail cam images to my laptop. I still have them, but I don't look at them anymore. I never reported it. What would I even say? I camped in the woods and a barefoot man stalked my tent in silence for 2 nights straight? I wouldn't have believed me either. Maybe it was a squatter. Maybe someone with mental illness. Maybe someone who just lives out there in the trees and knows how to avoid being seen. I don't know, but I haven't gone back. I still hunt, but never alone. Never that far off-grid. I stay within range of cell towers now. I bring a satellite beacon. I don't sleep more than a few hours at a time, and I never ignore that strange, crawling feeling in the middle of the night again. Whatever was out there with me those nights in 2017 wasn't an animal. It wasn't a ghost either. It was a man, a real one, and that, honestly, is scarier than anything else I could have imagined. It was early October of 2016 when I decided to go on a solo camping trip to clear my head. I had just turned 29, and the stress from work had started piling up to the point where I couldn't even sleep through the night without waking up thinking about deadlines. I chose a quiet spot out in northern New Mexico, near the Carson National Forest. I had only been in the area once before with a friend during college, but I remembered the place being peaceful and far from the kind of noise I was trying to get away from. I packed light, but I had all the essentials: tent, sleeping bag, plenty of food and water, a small cooler, a hunting knife, headlamp, portable charger, first aid kit, and an old .22 rifle I kept more for peace of mind than for any serious use. I drove my Jeep up a dirt road that branched off from the main highway, then kept driving even further until I reached a thin clearing between the trees, about 6 or 7 miles from the nearest paved road. There were no other cars or signs of people around. It felt like the kind of place no one had been in for a long time, which was exactly what I was looking for. By the time I pitched the tent, the sun had already dipped behind the hills. The woods got quiet pretty fast after dark, except for the usual chirping and rustling of nighttime animals. I cooked up a small dinner over a tiny propane burner and sat in my folding chair for a while, just listening to the wind brushing through the trees. There was something calming about the stillness. It didn't feel threatening, just isolated. The first night was uneventful. I stayed up a bit, read some pages from a paperback I'd brought, then crawled into the tent and fell asleep easier than I had in weeks. I woke up once, probably around 3 a.m., to pee, and noticed how still everything was. No wind, no bugs, no animal sounds, just dead silence. It was strange, but not alarming. I figured the temperature drop had something to do with it, or maybe some predator nearby had made the smaller creatures hide. The second day was more relaxed. I hiked a bit along the ridge and followed a shallow creek upstream. I saw fresh elk tracks in the soft earth and even spotted a few deer across the water at one point. When I got back to the camp in the afternoon, I gathered some deadwood and lit a fire to prepare for the cold night. The temperature dipped fast once the sun dropped, and I could feel that familiar mountain chill settle in. I stayed close to the flames, sipping from a can of beer and watching the trees sway in the flickering light. That second night, I woke up again in the middle of the night. Same time, around 3 a.m. This time it was because I heard something. Not loud, but not natural either. It was a rhythmic crunching sound, like slow, deliberate footsteps. My tent was zipped shut, and I couldn't see outside, but the sound came from the tree line, maybe 30 or 40 feet away. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. I just lay there, ears wide open, every hair on my arms standing straight. The steps stopped eventually. I waited another 10 minutes before unzipping the tent as quietly as I could. I peeked out. Nothing. Just darkness and the glowing embers of the fire, which had mostly died down. I got out, rifle in hand, and circled the campsite. I didn't see any prints in the dirt or hear anything else. I figured it might have been a coyote or a deer passing through, but something about those footsteps didn't feel right. They sounded upright, bipedal, not fast, not hurried, just slow and intentional. The third day, I stayed close to camp. I had this weird feeling I couldn't shake. Not fear exactly, just a gut instinct that I wasn't as alone as I thought I was. I noticed some broken twigs near the edge of the woods that hadn't been snapped before. Some pine needles were disturbed in a narrow trail that hadn't been there the day before. I told myself it was probably just a deer or bear wandering through. Still, I kept the rifle loaded and within reach for the rest of the day. That night, I didn't sleep much at all. I laid in my sleeping bag, staring at the top of the tent, listening for the sound of movement again. Around 2:45 a.m., I heard it. Not footsteps this time, but a kind of clicking or tapping sound, like something tapping a stick against a tree once every few seconds.
Top, Percy, top.
It came from the same area as before, just beyond the edge of the firelight. I didn't move. I just listened, every muscle in my body tight. After a while, the tapping stopped. But then I heard something breathing, close, heavy, slow breaths just beyond the thin fabric of the tent wall. I could almost feel the exhale against the material. I held my breath. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure it was loud enough to be heard outside. Then, after maybe 10 seconds, the breathing stopped. I didn't dare move. Eventually, after what felt like an hour, I forced myself to unzip the tent and peek out. Nothing. Again, nothing. The fire had gone out. It was pitch dark, except for the faint stars above the trees. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just sat inside the tent with my rifle across my lap, eyes fixed on the flap, ears tuned to every snap or creak in the woods. By morning, I decided to pack up and leave. I didn't have any proof of anything, but my instincts were screaming that I wasn't welcome out there anymore. I packed fast and didn't even bother making breakfast. As I folded up the tent, I noticed something in the dirt about 10 feet from where I had slept. Tracks. Not boot prints, not animal prints. They were bare feet, but not quite right. Too narrow. The toes were long and almost claw-like, and there were only 4 per foot. The prints led from the tree line directly toward my tent, then veered off into the woods again. I stared at them for a long time. I even took a photo on my phone, but something about the light and the angle made it hard to capture clearly. Still, I knew what I saw. I didn't imagine it. I got into my Jeep and drove back toward the highway faster than I probably should have, skidding on the loose dirt more than once. I didn't stop until I was in cell service again. I didn't call anyone, didn't even tell anyone when I got home. I just sat in my apartment that night, blinds drawn, thinking about the whole thing over and over. Over the next few weeks, I kept looking up stories online. Reports of strange things in the woods, especially in the Southwest. Stories about shapeshifters and people seeing things that looked almost human, but not quite. The term that came up the most was skinwalker. I'm not saying that's what it was. I'm not saying I believe in any of that. But I do know what I heard. I know what I saw, and I know how it made me feel. Since that trip, I haven't gone camping alone again. I still go out sometimes, but only with other people, and never anywhere near that part of New Mexico. There's something out there in those woods that isn't supposed to be, and I think it knew I was alone. I think it watched me, got close enough to touch the tent. And I think if I'd stayed one more night, I wouldn't be here writing this. It was late summer 2014, and I had taken some time off work after a long stretch of night shifts. I was 33 back then, living in Birmingham, and all I wanted was to get out of the city for a bit. I didn't have many friends into the outdoors, so I packed up my small hatchback alone and headed north into the Peak District. I'd been up there a couple of times before for short day hikes, but I'd never camped overnight in the area. I figured it would be quiet, peaceful, and isolated enough for what I needed. I planned to stay for 2 nights, maybe 3. My car was loaded with the basics: tent, sleeping bag, stove, a cooler with food, some water bottles, and a map. I avoided the usual campsites and instead followed a winding country road that led deep into a less popular part of the park near a wooded valley outside a village called Long Nor. There wasn't much around besides dry stone walls, sheep fields, and patches of forest. It was the kind of place where you could leave your phone in the car and forget about everything. I found a small clearing about 20 minutes walk from the road. It was surrounded on 3 sides by thick trees and sloped down slightly toward a stream that wasn't marked on my map. I set up the tent close to the tree line, hidden well enough that no one would spot it unless they were really looking. I got everything sorted by late afternoon. The sun had dipped low behind the hills, and the only sound was the soft rustling of trees and distant sheep calling out across the fields. That first night was uneventful. I cooked up some beans, had a couple of sandwiches, and sat watching the last of the light fade behind the trees. The air was still. I didn't hear a single person, vehicle, or even a plane. It felt like I had the entire valley to myself. The second day, I went for a long hike up into the hills, left my gear behind, and followed a dry ridge that looped around back to my camp. I got back in the evening, a little tired, but still felt good. I made a fire using some fallen branches and twigs, and sat there in silence, watching the orange glow bounce off the leaves. It was peaceful. At least it was until I noticed something strange across the stream. It was dark, and I hadn't used my torch yet. The fire was bright enough for me to see the trees nearby. I looked across the water and saw what I thought was a tree trunk at first, but then it moved. A figure stepped backward into the trees. I froze. It had been standing completely still, maybe just inside the tree line. I couldn't make out the face or body clearly, but it looked like a woman, thin, pale, long dark hair. I thought maybe I was imagining it, maybe a shadow or just my eyes playing tricks on me. Still, it shook me a bit. I sat still for a while, staring at the same spot, trying to see if anything moved again. Nothing did. After about half an hour, I stood up, walked over to the stream, and shone my torch across. I didn't see anything, just trees, the grass, and the dark. I didn't cross. I didn't feel a reason to. I just stood there a while, then went back to my fire, kicked some dirt on it, and climbed into my tent. I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up at every sound. The wind picked up a bit around midnight, and I kept hearing leaves moving, sticks breaking. Once, I thought I heard footsteps, soft ones like someone walking barefoot on damp ground. I held still in my sleeping bag, not daring to move or unzip the tent flap. I didn't hear anything more after that, just the occasional owl hooting in the distance. I must have eventually fallen asleep out of exhaustion. In the morning, I stepped out of the tent and walked toward the stream again. The grass on the opposite bank was flattened in a straight line, as if someone had walked across it recently. I told myself it could have been a deer, but deer don't usually walk in straight lines like that. Still, I tried not to let it bother me. I boiled some water, made tea, and sat there trying to calm myself down. I even laughed a bit, thinking how ridiculous it all felt. Me, scared of some shadows in the woods. I thought about packing up and heading home early, but part of me didn't want to. I'd come out here to clear my head, and I didn't want to leave just because of one strange night. So I stayed. That third evening, I didn't light a fire. I ate cold food and kept everything quiet. I sat inside my tent with the flap open, listening. It got dark fast that night, clouds rolling in to cover the moon. I used my torch as little as possible, not wanting to draw attention. At some point, I heard it again. Footsteps, this time closer. I held my breath and listened. They came from the far side of the stream again, but they weren't wandering footsteps. They were slow, deliberate. I turned my torch on and pointed it toward the trees. She was standing there, just outside the trees this time. Definitely a woman, wearing an old long coat, maybe green or gray, hard to tell in the light. Her hair was long, hanging wet against her face. She wasn't moving, just standing and staring in my direction. I couldn't see her eyes clearly, but I could feel her looking straight at me. I didn't move. I didn't call out. I just held the torch still. My heart was pounding. I wasn't sure what to do. After maybe 30 seconds, she stepped backward again, back into the trees. Gone. That was it. I wasn't going to wait around for her to come any closer. I packed up everything in less than 10 minutes, barely rolled up the tent, just stuffed it in the boot of the car and drove back toward the main road without looking back. I didn't even check if she followed. I just wanted out. I stopped at a petrol station in Buxton about 40 minutes later. It was brightly lit, people inside. The noise of the road and voices around me felt comforting. I didn't mention what I'd seen. I just bought a drink, sat in the car, and waited until my hands stopped shaking. When I got home, I tried to find stories online. I searched about missing people, strange sightings, anything. I came across an old forum post about a woman who'd been seen wandering around that part of the peaks back in the late 90s. A hiker had found her standing in the middle of the path, not speaking, soaking wet. She walked away before he could help her. There wasn't much more than that. A few other people claimed to have seen her too, mostly from a distance. No one ever got close. She was just always watching. I don't know who she was, or if she was even real. Maybe it was some local who lived off-grid. Maybe she wasn't right in the head. But I know what I saw. I know the way she stood there, silent, unmoving, watching from the trees. I haven't camped alone since. I don't think I ever will again. Something about the way she moved, slow, quiet, without hesitation, stuck with me. She wasn't lost. She wasn't confused. She was there for a reason, and she saw me. She stood just close enough to make sure I knew it. It was the summer of 2016 when I decided to take a short break from everything. I was 29 at the time, working in Leeds at a construction company, and the stress had been building up for months. I needed to get away from the city, from the constant noise, the traffic, and even my own thoughts. I didn't want to stay at a hotel or a crowded campsite. I wanted isolation, real quiet, just me and the outdoors. My cousin Liam had an old family farm down in North Yorkshire, not far from a village called Ingleton. The land hadn't been used properly in decades. The barn was still standing, but everything else, the farmhouse, the fences, even the access road, was slowly being swallowed up by nature. He hadn't been down there in years, and when I asked if I could camp on the land for a few nights, he just said, "Sure, if you can find it." I packed light. A canvas tent, a sleeping bag, a knife, some canned food, and my old camping stove. I took a torch, a power bank, a lighter, and my old Nikon camera. I loaded everything into my car and drove south. The road to the farm was overgrown and half gone. I parked where the grass got too thick and walked the last quarter mile to the barn. It was everything I wanted. Silent, still, wild. There were no animals, no people, no distant roads or chimneys. just the slow rustle of trees and the wind brushing over empty fields. The barn looked rough, roof half collapsed, ivy crawling up the wood, but it felt peaceful. I set up my tent a few meters from the entrance, near the tree line, and settled in. The first night was uneventful. I stayed up listening to the wind and watching the stars blink through gaps in the trees. It got cold around 2 a.m., and I had to pull on another layer, but otherwise it was calm. I slept fine. The next morning, I walked the area. I didn't go far, maybe 2 kilometers in every direction. I saw the remains of the old farmhouse, now just a pile of stone overgrown with moss and weeds. There were fragments of old farm equipment, rusted and half-buried. I even found the base of what used to be a well, sealed with a slab of concrete. That made sense. My uncle probably did that before the place was abandoned. Still, I made a mental note to stay clear of it. Around 4 p.m. that day, I started noticing little things. At first, it was just a branch snapped clean off on the path I walked that morning. I thought maybe it was a deer or a fox. Then I saw prints, shoe prints. They were light, not very deep, but they weren't mine. Too small, almost like a woman's boot or maybe a teenager's trainer. They looped near the barn and vanished at the creek that cut through the edge of the trees. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept hearing small sounds. Not loud crashes or shouting, just soft things. Light steps, a cough. I kept checking out of the tent with my torch, but I never saw anything. Around 3 a.m., I finally drifted off, convinced it was just my nerves playing up. The third day is when it got strange. I found the back of the barn open. I never touched the back doors. I'd propped them shut with a plank when I arrived. But when I walked past that morning, the plank was on the ground and both doors hung open slightly. I went inside, stepped over old tools, hay, rotted wood, and looked around. Nothing seemed moved. Still, I shut the doors and wedged them closed again. Later that afternoon, I walked farther into the woods. I wanted to clear my head. I followed the creek for a while, taking pictures of birds, moss-covered stones, and tangled roots. It was peaceful for a bit, but then I noticed something that threw me off. A sock. It was damp and hung up on a broken branch, maybe chest height. A gray ankle sock, crusted with mud. I didn't touch it, just stood there looking at it for a while, wondering who would have left it out here. No paths, no signs of camping, nothing. Just the sock and a faint trail in the grass like someone had passed through recently. I backed off and returned to camp. That night I didn't cook. I just ate a cold can of beans and sat in my tent with the torch off, listening. I stayed completely still for hours, just waiting. Around midnight, I heard someone breathe near the tent. It wasn't an animal. It was close, just on the other side of the thin fabric wall. I could hear soft gravel crunching under their weight. One step, then another, then nothing. I didn't move. I waited in complete silence. No torch, no noise. My heart felt like it was going to tear through my ribs. After a while, I slowly slid the knife out of my pack and held it under the sleeping bag. I didn't sleep the whole night. I just waited for morning. When the sun finally rose, I stepped outside. There were no signs of anyone, no footprints this time, but the tent zipper had fresh dirt around it, as if someone had touched it with muddy fingers. I looked over at the barn. Both the back doors were open again. That was it for me. I packed everything in 15 minutes, didn't bother folding the tent properly, just stuffed it in the bag. I walked back to the car, turning around every few steps, listening. Nothing followed me, but I still felt eyes on me the whole way. When I got home, I called Liam and asked if anyone else had access to the land. He said no. No one lived within miles of that place. No squatters, no neighbors, just trees, fields, and old empty buildings. I never went back. A few months later, I read about a man being arrested in Cumbria. living off-grid and trespassing on remote land. Apparently, he'd been spotted on game cameras miles apart. Authorities thought he was living out of barns and sheds, stealing supplies from rural homes. One of the photos they published looked too familiar, the barn in the background, the trees, even the slope of the field. I don't know if it was the same place. I never told anyone, not even Liam, but I can still remember the sound of that breathing, just inches from my face, with only the thin tent fabric between us. That was enough. I don't camp anymore, not alone, not anywhere near old farmland. I was 34 that summer, and I remember because it was the year after I left my job at the construction site in Flagstaff. I'd spent months drifting between short gigs, mostly in Arizona and New Mexico, but by mid-July I was burned out and needed a break. A solo camping trip sounded like the only thing that would clear my head. I'd done it before. Long stretches alone in the woods always helped reset things for me. I picked a place up in north-central Utah, somewhere about an hour southeast of Duchesne. It was an area I'd read about in a hiking forum a few years back, but I had never gotten around to going there. It wasn't a national park or anything fancy, just a patch of land along a forest road that twisted its way through a shallow mountain range. No campsites, no fire rings, no crowds. That's what I liked. I didn't even bring a GPS. Just a printed map, compass, and a few topographic charts. The spot I finally settled on was near a bend in the road with a small dry creek running past it. I parked off the gravel shoulder where the tree line opened just enough to tuck my truck behind some brush. I set up my tent about 50 feet into the woods, just far enough that you couldn't see the truck from where I slept. I liked keeping things hidden when I camped alone. It made me feel safer in a way, like I was invisible. The first 2 days were normal. I spent the mornings hiking up ridges, cutting through the dry pines, and scrambling over slick granite. The sun was hot during the day but dropped hard at night. I cooked beans and rice over my little propane burner, read a paperback I'd brought, and slept like a rock. There were no bugs, no animals too close to camp, nothing strange. But on the third night, something shifted. I just crawled into my tent around 10 p.m. I remember lying back on the foam pad, looking at the ceiling of the tent and listening to the wind move through the trees. That's something you start to notice when you spend time alone in places like that. The layers of sound. You can tell the difference between a squirrel rustling leaves and the heavier, slower movement of something bigger. That night, I was still awake when I heard something in the distance. It was subtle at first, like a thud or maybe a boot against dry ground. It wasn't close, maybe 70 or 80 yards off, past where the slope dropped into the creek. I stayed still. I knew it wasn't an animal. The pacing was wrong. It was too spaced out. Not four-legged, not quick like a deer, not scratchy like a raccoon. It was slow, deliberate. For 5 minutes, I heard nothing. Then it came again. Another footstep, and another. I slid my knife from my pack and kept it close. I didn't move or breathe loud, just listened. Eventually, it faded. Nothing else happened that night, and I fell asleep sometime after midnight. The next morning, I told myself it was probably just someone hiking late. Maybe someone camped further down. But deep down, I didn't believe that. That place was far off the trail. I hadn't seen a single car, bike tire track, or boot print since I got there. Nothing. Still, I stayed. I didn't want to let nerves drive me off. I hiked that day but stuck close to camp, looping back every few hours just to check on things. I didn't find anything out of place.
No prints.
No broken branches. I set up a few noise traps that evening, little strings tied to cans near the edge of the site, just in case. That night, I didn't sleep well. At around 1:30 a.m., I woke up to a sound that made my blood run cold. The unmistakable metallic clink of one of those cans. Then silence. Then another. Someone was moving at the edge of my camp. Carefully, slowly. I didn't move. I lay on my side, my hand wrapped around the knife handle. I breathed through my nose, heart pounding so loud I thought it would give me away. Whoever it was didn't use a flashlight. They stayed just out of sight. I didn't sleep at all after that. When the sun finally came up, I got out of the tent and scanned the area. One of the strings had been broken. The can was on its side. No animal tracks.
No scat.
Just the faint indent of a boot print in the dirt nearby. Mid-size, maybe men's size 10 or 11. I packed up my stuff. Fast. I didn't cook. I didn't eat. I rolled the tent tight, stuffed it in the pack, and walked straight back to the truck. But something didn't feel right even as I approached the road. I kept looking over my shoulder. I felt like I was being watched. That's not a feeling I get often. When I reached the truck, I noticed the driver's side door wasn't closed all the way. That stopped me cold. I never leave it open. I'm obsessive about it. I checked the inside. Everything looked normal, but my glove box had been rummaged through. Papers out of place. The registration crumpled and shoved back in the wrong way. Someone had been in my truck. I drove out of there fast, tearing down that gravel road faster than I should have, tires kicking up dust. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting someone to come out of the trees behind me. I didn't stop until I hit pavement. Took hours before I felt like I could think straight. I pulled over at a gas station in a small town called Roosevelt. I checked everything again. The gear in the bed was untouched, but I noticed something in the back seat that hadn't been there before. A single cigarette butt tucked into the corner of the seat behind the passenger side. I don't smoke. That detail chilled me worse than anything else. Whoever it was had taken the time to go through my things, sit in my truck, and leave behind that little reminder. I stayed the night at a cheap motel in town, locked the door, propped a chair against it, slept with the knife on the nightstand. I never went back to that area. I stopped camping alone for a long time after that. What scared me wasn't just that someone was there. It was that they didn't take anything. They didn't leave a mess. They didn't try to hurt me outright. They just watched, waited, touched my things, got close enough to smell the inside of my truck. And they knew I was out there alone. Whatever they wanted, I don't know. But they were patient, careful, familiar with the area. That feeling of being hunted didn't leave for months. Even now, I double-check every lock, every tent zipper, every tree line. Because someone out there wasn't just passing through. They had planned it. They had time. And they knew exactly where I was. I was 34 when I decided to take a solo camping trip in northern Arkansas. It was late October of 2016, and I had some days off from my job at a hardware distribution warehouse near Little Rock. I wasn't married, didn't have kids, and I had gotten into the habit of camping once every few months to clear my head. I'd usually go with someone, but this time I felt like being completely alone. The spot I picked was in the Ozark National Forest, about 3 hours from where I lived. I found a primitive campsite through an old forum thread. It wasn't part of a park or maintained area, just a place someone had marked on a topographic map with a rough trail leading in. I drove out early in the morning with my truck packed. I brought basic gear, sleeping bag, tent, small stove, and enough food for 3 days. I had my old .22 rifle in the truck too, not for hunting but for the occasional snake or to feel a little safer. The drive up was uneventful, winding roads through wooded hills, then gravel paths. I parked about half a mile from where I'd be camping because the path got too narrow for the truck. The walk-in was quiet. I didn't see anyone else, no hikers, no campers. Felt isolated in a good way. There were some orange and brown leaves on the ground, and the sky was gray, but the air was still. When I reached the clearing where I'd pitch my tent, it was late afternoon. There was a fire ring made out of rocks that looked like it hadn't been used in years. Moss had grown around the base stones. The trees were spaced out enough that it wasn't suffocating but still thick enough to muffle sound. I unpacked, set up my tent, collected firewood, and boiled some water for instant noodles. That first night was uneventful. I sat by the fire, sipped coffee from a tin mug, then crawled into my sleeping bag before 10. I listened to crickets and a few owls. I slept straight through the night. The next day I went for a short hike. I followed a faint trail that led up a ridge behind the camp, trying to get a better view of the area. I carried a small backpack with a snack, my phone, though there was no signal, and a folding knife. The forest was still. I didn't see any deer or other animals, just squirrels and birds now and then. After walking about an hour up the ridge, I found a set of stone steps. They were old, covered in leaves, and led to what looked like the ruins of a hunting shack. All that remained were parts of the foundation and a partial wall made of rotting wood. There were rusted nails sticking out of one of the beams and some broken glass underfoot. I figured it had been abandoned for decades. I didn't stay long. I made it back to camp by early afternoon and boiled some soup. I spent the rest of the evening tending the fire, listening to the wind move through the trees. It was colder that night. I added an extra blanket over my sleeping bag before turning in. Around 2 or 3 a.m., I woke up. I wasn't sure why. There wasn't any sound that jolted me awake. I just remember opening my eyes and staring at the roof of the tent, fully alert. I lay still and listened. It was quiet. No wind, no owls, nothing. That's when I noticed a faint crunch. Just once, like someone stepped on a stick. Then silence again. I told myself it was a raccoon or a deer, rolled over, and eventually fell back asleep. In the morning, I stepped out and scanned the area. I didn't see anything out of place, but there were a few scuffed leaves about 15 feet away from the tent. Not prints, just signs something had walked by. I couldn't tell if it was animal or human. I looked around but saw nothing else, so I chalked it up to my imagination and the natural noise of the woods. That third day, I mostly stayed around camp. I read a little, split some kindling, and even took a nap in the sun with my jacket rolled up under my head. Around dusk, I gathered more firewood, and that's when I noticed something off. Behind the camp, maybe 40 yards away, there was a tree with something leaning against it. I hadn't noticed it before. I walked closer. It was a single wooden crutch, old like from a hospital in the 70s or 80s, worn smooth and faded gray. There were scratch marks on it, like something had scraped the wood with a rock or a blade. I stood there a long time staring at it. It wasn't mine. It hadn't been there the day before. I didn't hear or see anyone come through camp. I took the crutch and carried it back to the fire. I sat with it for a while, not sure what to think. It felt like some kind of message, like someone was letting me know I wasn't alone. I kept my rifle close that night. I didn't sleep well. The fire burned low as I sat awake in the cold. The forest was completely silent again. Around 1 a.m., I heard another sound, a slow, steady dragging noise. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't trying to be quiet either. It stopped and started like something being pulled. I stood up, holding the rifle, but didn't see anything beyond the edge of the firelight. I stayed standing until the sun came up. Didn't sleep a minute. That morning I packed. I had planned to stay one more night, but I didn't feel safe anymore. Before I left, I walked toward the direction the dragging sound had come from. About 60 feet into the woods, I saw deep scuff marks in the dirt and leaves. A trail. Whatever it was, it had moved through there that night. The marks curved and weaved around trees, eventually heading further into the forest. I didn't follow them too far. I didn't want to know. When I got back to my truck, I stopped cold. On the windshield, right under the wiper blade, was a photo. An old Polaroid, yellowed and curling at the edges. It showed a man standing in a forest clearing, wearing jeans and no shirt, holding a wooden crutch. His back was to the camera, and it looked like the same kind of crutch I'd found. The weirdest part was that the trees in the photo looked almost exactly like the ones around my campsite. I didn't take the photo. I left it on the ground and drove back down the mountain road, faster than I probably should have. I didn't stop until I hit paved roads again. That was 9 years ago. I haven't gone camping alone since. I still think about that night, though. The crutch, the dragging sound, the photo. I've tried looking up missing persons or anything connected to that area, but there's nothing. I even went back once, a year later, but only to the truck trail. I never stepped into the woods again. There was no sign of a crutch, no photo, nothing at all. Just trees and silence. Whatever happened out there, it wasn't supernatural. It wasn't a ghost or anything like that. It was a person, a real person. I don't know what they wanted or how long they'd been watching me, but they were out there and they got close, real close. That's what sticks with me. I think if I had stayed that last night, I wouldn't be writing this. I truly believe that.